In a small, peaceful village, two young boys were inseparable. One was 6 years old, full of boundless energy and curiosity, while the other was 10, slightly taller and always ready for adventure. From the moment they woke up until the sun dipped below the horizon, they were together playing, eating, and exploring as a team. Every day, they ran through the narrow dirt paths of their village, chasing each other and laughing loudly, their footsteps kicking up little clouds of dust. The villagers knew them well, often shaking their heads fondly at their endless energy. The older boy, being bigger and stronger, naturally took on the role of the leader, always coming up with new games and challenges for them to conquer. The younger boy, eager to prove himself, never backed down from any challenge, no matter how difficult it seemed. Their friendship was built on trust, laughter, and an unspoken understanding that no matter what happened, they had each other's backs. If one of them got in trouble for sneaking extra food from the market, the other would quickly come up with an excuse to cover for him. If one fell and scraped his knee, the other would rush to find a cloth to stop the bleeding, patting him on the back with a reassuring, "You're fine. It's just a little scratch." Despite their age difference, they never saw each other as unequal. The older boy didn't treat the younger one as weak, and the younger one didn't see his friend as someone he couldn't keep up with. To them, they were simply best friends, partners in every adventure. No matter how small or big, that particular afternoon was no different. The sun was shining brightly, and the boys had finished their morning chores. With nothing but freedom ahead of them, they decided to race beyond the village, their laughter filling the air. "You can't catch me," the older boy teased, sprinting ahead with a grin. "Oh yes, I can," the younger boy shouted back, determination in his voice as he pushed his little legs to run faster. Neither of them knew that this playful chase would soon turn into the most important test of their friendship and strength. The warm afternoon breeze carried the sound of laughter as the two boys raced beyond the village. The older boy sprinted ahead, his legs moving effortlessly, while the younger one pushed himself to keep up. Neither of them noticed where they were heading. They were too lost in the excitement of the chase. Then, in a split second, everything changed. The older boy's foot suddenly slipped, and before he could react, he plunged straight into a deep, hidden, well-concealed by overgrown bushes. A loud splash echoed as he hit the water. For a moment, there was silence. Then, panic. "Help! Help! I can't swim!" he screamed, his arms flailing wildly, his head dipping beneath the surface before he managed to resurface, gasping for air. His eyes were wide with terror as he thrashed around, struggling to stay afloat. The younger boy skidded to a stop at the edge of the well. His breath caught in his throat. His best friend was drowning. Fear paralyzed him for a second. His heart pounded in his chest and his hands trembled. He wanted to scream for help, but the village was far away. No one would hear them in time. His mind raced. What could he do? He was only 6. He wasn't strong enough to lift his friend, and he had no idea how deep the well was. Then, his eyes darted around desperately, and that's when he saw it. A wooden bucket with a long, thick rope attached to it lay nearby. Without wasting a second, he grabbed the rope and threw the bucket into the well. "Hold on to it!" he shouted, his voice shaking but firm. The older boy's hands reached out frantically, gripping the bucket with all his strength. But the real battle was just beginning. The 6-year-old planted his small feet into the ground, wrapping the rope tightly around his hands. He pulled with everything he had, his tiny arms burning almost instantly from the effort. He didn't think about whether The moment the older boy grabbed onto the bucket, the real struggle began. The 6-year-old gripped the rope as tightly as his small hands would allow, his feet digging into the dirt for balance. His arms immediately ached from the strain, his muscles trembling under the weight. The older boy was bigger, heavier, and the force of the water pulling him down made it even harder. But the younger boy didn't let go. He couldn't. "I won't let go. I won't let go." He kept repeating under his breath, forcing himself to pull harder. His tiny hands burned as the rough rope dug into his palms. Sweat dripped down his forehead, stinging his eyes, but he refused to stop. His heart pounded like a drum, fear creeping into his chest with every second that passed. He could feel the rope slipping slightly, his grip weakening. His legs shook as he braced himself against the ground. The older boy clung tightly to the bucket, coughing and gasping for air. "Pull harder," he cried out, desperation in his voice. The younger boy gritted his teeth. He couldn't let his best friend drown. He couldn't let this end here. Summoning every ounce of strength in his small body, he pulled again, one hard, determined tug after another. His arms screamed in pain. His breath came in short, ragged bursts, but he kept going. Inch by inch, his friend rose out of the water. The bucket swayed dangerously, but the older boy held on, his fingers locked in a death grip. With one final, desperate pull, the older boy's head and shoulders broke past the rim of the well. The younger boy gave one last heave, and suddenly, the weight lifted. The older boy tumbled onto the ground, coughing and gasping for air. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Both lay sprawled on the ground, panting, their chests rising and falling rapidly. The younger boy's arms were limp with exhaustion, his hands raw from the rope. Then finally, the older boy turned his head and looked at his friend. His eyes filled with tears not just from fear, but from overwhelming gratitude. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Of course I did," the younger boy said, wiping the sweat and tears from his face. "Who else would I play with if you were gone?" And with that, both boys burst into tears, holding on to each other, unable to believe what had just happened. As the two boys sat on the ground, their bodies still trembling from exhaustion and shock, reality began to sink in. The older boy was alive, saved from what could have been a tragic fate, all because his best friend had refused to give up. They held onto each other for a few moments, still breathing heavily, trying to process everything that had just happened. Then, a new thought suddenly hit them both. "Oh no," the older boy whispered, eyes widening. "What if our parents find out?" The younger boy's heart sank. He hadn't even thought about that yet. Their parents had warned them so many times about wandering too far from the village. They had been told to be careful, to stay where it was safe. And yet, here, they were soaking wet, covered in dirt, with the terrifying truth of what had just happened weighing on their shoulders. "We're going to get in so much trouble," the older boy groaned, rubbing his face in frustration. For a brief second, they both considered keeping it a secret. Maybe if they washed up before anyone noticed, they could pretend nothing had happened. But deep down, they knew that was impossible. The younger boy's hands were raw from the rope, his arms weak and sore. The older boy's clothes were dripping wet, his hair matted with water. More than that, though, they knew they couldn't keep something like this hidden. This wasn't just an accident or a harmless mistake. It was something far bigger, something neither of them could fully understand yet. With a sigh, they helped each other to their feet. Their legs felt like jelly, but they leaned on each other for support as they made their way back toward the village. Every step felt heavier than the last, the weight of what they had to confess pressing down on them. By the time they reached their homes, the sun was beginning to set. As soon as they saw their families, they ran straight to them, speaking all at once, frantically explaining everything that had happened. They expected shock. They expected concern, but they did not expect what came next. Instead of gasps of amazement or relief, the villagers burst into laughter. "A 6-year-old pulled a 10-year-old out of a well," one man scoffed. "Impossible. He can barely lift a bucket of water." Another woman chuckled. "You boys and your silly stories." The two boys exchanged heartbroken glances. No one believed them. The laughter of the villagers echoed in the air, but to the two boys, it felt heavier than the well itself. They had expected to be scolded for wandering too far, maybe even punished, but they had never thought that no one would believe them. The older boy clenched his fist. "But it's true," he protested, his voice filled with frustration. "I fell into the well. He pulled me out." The villagers shook their heads, smiling as if they were listening to a child's wild imagination. "A 6-year-old pulling up a 10-year-old. That's not possible," one man said, crossing his arms. "He's too small, too weak." The younger boy looked down at his hands, still red and raw from the rope. He felt the soreness in his arms, the exhaustion in his legs. He knew what he had done. He had felt the weight, the struggle, the burning pain of not giving up. And yet, standing there in front of all these adults, people who had lived longer, who were supposed to understand more, he suddenly felt small again. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was impossible. Doubt started to creep into his mind, and for the first time since pulling his friend out of the well, he questioned himself. Had it really happened the way he remembered? Had he actually been strong enough, or was it something else? Just as the weight of disbelief was about to crush him, a deep, calm voice cut through the crowd. "The question is not how he did it," said an elderly man stepping forward. The village fell silent. Everyone turned to look at Uncle Frederick, the wisest and most respected elder in the village. He walked slowly toward the boys, his eyes filled with understanding. "The real question," he continued, "is why he could do it." The villagers exchanged puzzled glances. The boys, still standing together, held their breath, waiting for his explanation. "There was no one there to tell him that he couldn't do it," Uncle Frederick said, his voice steady and wise. "No one told him he was too weak. No one told him it was impossible. Not even himself." The villagers grew quiet, their expressions shifting from amusement to realization. The younger boy looked up, his eyes widening. He had never thought of it that way before. Maybe the reason he had been able to do the impossible was simply because he never believed that he couldn't. The village fell silent as Uncle Frederick's words hung in the air. The laughter was gone, replaced by quiet contemplation. The younger boy looked up at the old man, his heart still racing. "No one told him he was too weak. No one told him it was impossible," Uncle Frederick repeated, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. "So he simply became strong enough." The villagers, who had been so quick to dismiss the story, now shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at the boy's small, tired hands that were red and raw from gripping the rope. Others glanced at the older boy, still damp from the well, his face filled with gratitude. For the first time, they began to question their own disbelief. The younger boy, who had started to doubt himself just moments ago, suddenly felt something shift inside him. He remembered the burning in his arms, the sting of sweat in his eyes, the ache in his legs as he planted his feet into the ground, refusing to let go. He had felt his strength. It had been real. It was real. But how? A woman finally asked. How could he have had that kind of strength? Uncle Frederick smiled knowingly, because strength isn't just in our bodies, it's in our minds. Doubt makes us weak. Belief makes us strong. The younger boy's eyes widened. He thought back to the moment he saw his friend in the well. There had been no hesitation, no second guessing, no fear of failure. He had known he had to save his friend. And because no one was there to tell him he couldn't, because even his own mind never questioned whether it was possible, he simply did it. The older boy turned to his friend, realization dawning on his face. "You did save me," he said softly. "Because you believed you could." The younger boy smiled, his chest swelling with pride. The villagers, one by one, nodded in understanding. What had seemed impossible before now felt entirely logical. The power of belief, the power of the mind, was stronger than they had ever realized. And in that moment, the younger boy wasn't just the child who had saved his best friend. He was a symbol of something much greater, a reminder that the only real limits are the ones we choose to believe in. The villagers stood in stunned silence, Uncle Frederick's words settling deep into their minds. The once dismissive expressions of doubt were now replaced with something different: understanding. The younger boy, who had felt small just moments ago, now stood a little taller. He had spent the last few minutes doubting himself, wondering if maybe they were right, if maybe he hadn't done the impossible. But now, he knew the truth. He had saved his best friend, not because of some miracle or sudden burst of strength. He had done it simply because he never stopped to question whether he could. The older boy looked at him with newfound admiration. "I was so scared," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "I thought I was going to drown, but then I saw you, and you didn't look scared at all. You just acted." The younger boy thought back to that moment at the well. He remembered the sheer panic of seeing his friend struggling. The way his heart had pounded, the way his hands had trembled. But he had been too focused on saving him to think about what he was feeling. The villagers, too, began to reflect on their own lives. How many times had they given up on something because someone told them they weren't capable? How many dreams had they abandoned because they believed their limitations were real? Uncle Frederick nodded as he saw the realization spread across their faces. "We place limits on ourselves all the time," he said. "Sometimes we listen to the doubts of others. Sometimes those doubts come from within. But this boy, he never let doubts stop him, and that's why he was strong enough." A hushed murmur rippled through the crowd, but it was no longer laughter. It was quiet acknowledgement. The young boy hadn't just saved his friend, he had shown them all something important. The only real barriers in life are the ones we accept. The only true weaknesses are the ones we believe in. And in that moment, the younger boy realized that strength wasn't just about muscles or size. It was about belief. Because when no one tells you that you can't, you just do. The village had fallen silent, but the lesson remained, echoing in the minds of everyone who had doubted the young boy's strength. He had proven something far greater than physical ability. He had shown the power of belief. The older boy turned to his best friend, a soft smile forming on his face. "I'll never forget this," he said. "You didn't just save my life, you showed me what's possible when you don't listen to doubt." The younger boy grinned, finally allowing himself to feel the pride of what he had done. He had pulled his best friend from the well, not because he was the strongest boy in the village, but because he never stopped to question whether he could. Uncle Frederick placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "Remember this moment," he told him. "One day, the world will try to tell you what you can't do. It will say you're not smart enough, not strong enough, not capable enough. But if you refuse to believe those words, if you trust yourself the way you did today, you'll find that nothing is impossible." The villagers nodded, their earlier laughter replaced by admiration. What they had dismissed as a child's exaggeration was now a lesson they would carry with them forever. As the sun set over the village, the two boys walked home together, side by side, just as they always had. But something was different now. A new understanding had been forged not just between them, but within them. Years later, the younger boy would grow up to face many challenges. Some days, the world would seem too big, too overwhelming. But every time he felt doubt creeping in, he would think back to that day at the well, to the moment he gripped the rope and chose to believe. And he would remind himself, strength is not in the body, but in the mind. Doubt makes us weak. Belief makes us strong. This story isn't just about two boys in a village. It's about all of us. How often do we stop ourselves from chasing dreams, from taking risks, simply because we believe we can't? The truth is, we are all capable of more than we think. The only limits that exist are the ones we accept. So the next time someone tells you something is impossible, remember the boy who never knew he wasn't supposed to be strong enough, so he simply was.